You are listening to the Wellness Project powered by Spotlight Coalition. I'm your host, Des, and this is episode number 87. On today's episode, I speak with Megan Ettinger. Megan has struggled with anxiety and depression her whole life, but she didn't know it. She didn't have the language or the awareness to know what she was struggling with, but she knew that something was wrong. Megan wasn't diagnosed with anxiety and depression until her 30s. It really made sense to her and it all came together that she was diagnosed with anxiety, but she was surprised to know that she was also struggling with depression. I'm really looking forward to you hearing this interview because I think so many people can relate to Megan's story. I think that in the past few years, there has been an explosion of awareness for mental health, and now a lot more people are aware of what they may be struggling with. I think this episode is really going to resonate with a lot of people. This interview really did for me because I knew that I was struggling with something for a long time, but I didn't know what, just like Megan. I didn't know what it was. I would have all these different symptoms, shortness of breath, and my heart would race and I would get sweaty, things like that. I would overthink and my mind would be like a tornado of thoughts and I couldn't get out of those thoughts. It wasn't until a few years ago that I realized that what I was struggling with was anxiety. So I'm really looking forward to you hearing Megan's story because with that awareness, with that diagnosis comes so much power for change and implementing tools and techniques into your life to create that change. Being aware and having that diagnosis is so, so important. So let's speak with Megan about her journey and how she discovered that she was actually struggling with anxiety and depression all of her life and how she has implemented change into her life to take control over her mental health. Everyone, I am here with Megan Ettinger. Megan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yes, of course. Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah, great. Well, I'm really looking forward to speaking with you today. So, just to get started, can you give my audience an introduction to who you are, the struggles you've had with mental health, and how you got to where you are today?
Sure. Happy to do that. My name, as you said, is Megan. I am married to my high school sweetheart. We are now 35 years old. We met when we were 16. We had our first baby when we were 18, just a couple months after graduating from high school. He's now 17. And we went on to get married and have two more children as well. And I am someone who really always struggled with anxiety. And I always knew that about myself, but I did not have the vocabulary about it, right? So growing up, we used vocabulary like we're very tightly wound, things like that. And so I knew that that was part of who I was for as long as I can remember. But it wasn't until my 30s that I was actually diagnosed with anxiety. And we can get more into this story in detail. I was very surprised to find out that I was also struggling with depression. So I always knew that I had anxiety, but I was very surprised to learn that I also have depression. And so I've spent the last 5 years really learning about the two and about myself and my triggers and all of those types of things.
Would you mind sharing what your symptoms of anxiety and depression were and kind of what you thought were a part of your personality that you were surprised to find out that they were actually anxiety and depression?
Yeah. So when I'm in a situation that is, stressful or, as a mom with young children, I find myself in seasons that are, stressful and chaotic. When I'm in those phases, I get very short-tempered. More recently, when right before my diagnosis, I started having panic attacks, like cannot breathe, crying uncontrollably, like a literal ball on the floor, cannot function, panic attack. And when it was kind of sporadic, it was just something that I dealt with, right? Because it was usually at home and it wasn't, in my mind, that big of a deal. It wasn't until it started to happen when I was at work or when I was out somewhere that I was like, okay, this is now affecting my ability to actually function outside of my home, which is a big problem. And so I need to fix this. And I went to my doctor and basically just cried and said, I need some medicine. I don't know what else to do with myself.
And what are your earliest memories of you struggling with anxiety?
I can remember even back in like grade school, if something was going on around me that, I'd read into things. I would always think that like people were talking about me when, maybe they were, maybe they weren't, but kind of misreading like social cues, that kind of thing. And just my whole body getting very, very tense. Again, this is something that I grew up with, just always being really, really tense, like in my shoulders. I would just always be like, you can't see me, but just like scrunched up, kind of like all my muscles are contracted, right? And again, because it was something that I was always just a part of me, it wasn't until I had a face to face conversation with a professional that they were like, I mean, can you relax your shoulders? Like you're not breathing. Those kinds of things that were just who I was that I'm now learning are very strong signs of anxiety.
And what were the symptoms of depression? Because you said you were diagnosed with depression also, but that really took you by surprise. So, what were you struggling with as per depression?
Yeah. So at the time, I was really, again, just struggling with overall mood and lack of interest in things that I normally like. Like I'm one that likes to go out and go for a run or spend time with my friends and family. And I was finding myself not doing those things. And again, I just attributed it to being, overwhelmed. It's a busy season of life. At that time, when I was initially diagnosed, that was my main symptom. Now, fast forward into 2020 was when I really struggled with depression for the first time. We can talk about this too, but so I had taken anxiety and depression medicine for a year, and it was not the correct medicine for me. So I didn't feel good on it. And with my doctor's help, we weaned off of the medicine. And it was totally fine, but we did that at the end of 2019. So it was just really poor timing for the way things unfolded in the world over the next couple of months. And so in quarantine, I would find myself literally not able to get out of bed. I would not shower. And it sounds like really gross, but like literal basic care tasks that we usually are okay to like get up and do every day. It seemed like, I had to climb over a mountain to do those things. I couldn't focus at work. I would take time off from work because I would feel so like lethargic and sick. I would just take a sick day. And all of the messaging at that time was, we're all depressed. There's a lot of chaos in the world. We're locked inside, like all of these things. It's normal. It's normal. It's normal. And so for a long time in 2020, I was just like, oh, okay, this is normal. Everybody feels like this. I eventually went and saw my doctor and a therapist and got back on a different medicine. And we can talk about that journey too. But that's kind of the two different experiences I have with it.
You said that you were pretty much struggling with anxiety your whole life. Were your family aware that you were struggling, or your now husband, then boyfriend? Were they aware that you were struggling at all?
I would say my family, my extent, so like my mom, my sister, like the people I grew up with probably knew. But again, it was just like a family thing. That's just kind of how we were when I was growing up. It wasn't until I received my diagnosis that I really understood that other people in my family also struggle with anxiety and also are medicated for anxiety, which, by the way, my provider clued me in on the secret that if there are family members of yours that are taking medicines for these conditions, they might work for you too. So it's a good place to start if you're, just starting from scratch, just seeking this kind of route for the first time. Which again, at the time, I didn't even know anybody in my family was medicated. So my journey was a little bit different, but growing up, yes, everybody just kind of knew. It didn't impede my daily function. It was just kind of how I was. I would get irritable sometimes, and it was just, that's just how she is. More recently with the 2020 thing, yes, my husband knew and would, share it with me. I would totally cut him off. I wouldn't listen. My mom would ask me, are you okay? You seem, and I would just say, same thing, like, no, mom, no one's okay right now. Leave me alone. Or I would just stop answering the phone. People knew, my loved ones knew, people close to me knew, but it was hard for me to hear them when they were coming to me with concern because I would get so defensive. My husband and I actually separated during this whole thing in 2020 because he would, out of frustration, say to me, I need you to call your doctor and get back on your medicine. And what he was really saying in that moment was, I can see that you're in distress and you need help, and I don't know how to help you. But what I heard in that moment over and over and over again was, you are a handful and I need you to be medicated, or I can't tolerate this situation. And so I told him to leave. That was my wake up call. When he did leave, we've been together, we've been married for 15 years. It didn't take me very long to realize this is actually not what I want. Maybe there's some merit to some of the things that, have been said, whether it was in a healthy way or not. And we have since learned how to communicate much better. Number one, I'm able to communicate ahead of time when I'm starting to head down a road. I can give him kind of a heads up. And when he sees it in me, he approaches it in a very different way. And so that's something that I've not only had to work through on my own, but also with him together.
Oh, I'm really glad that you're sharing this story because mental health struggles, anxiety, depression, whatever the mental health struggles are, really impact the relationships around us. So I really
Mhm.
appreciate you sharing this story. Can you speak to a little bit how he approaches you now and what you may find more helpful when you are struggling with your mental health?
So now I can approach him and I can say, hey, babe, I'm having a day and it would be great if you could support me in these ways. And sometimes that way it looks like deciding what's for dinner and cooking it and cleaning it up and just taking care of the whole task from start to finish. Sometimes that looks like I need an hour and I need to get out of the house and go for a walk and clear my head. I need to identify what it is that I need so that I can communicate it to him and then he can decide whether or not he can fulfill that need. Before, he would try and help me, but I didn't even know how, I didn't know what I needed. And so I couldn't even help him help me, which really put him in a really unfair position. And it was really impossible, actually. And so I'm a lot more proactive about my communication, which has been extremely helpful. But also, he can come to me. It used to come out, he would approach me like during an argument, because again, I mentioned several times that I would be like very short fused, very short tempered. So we would get into these arguments and then he would say something. And so now, we don't argue quite as much for one thing. But for another thing, he's very proactive when he can see, differences in my demeanor, or if I get more quiet or I pull back, he will ask me like, are you okay? Is there something I can do to help? Do you need to call your sister and have a girls' night? And he'll make some suggestions. And it comes from much more of a loving, I care about you place, because we're not in the position of, these high emotion arguments because of my own inability to regulate myself.
Okay. All right. Great. That makes a lot of sense. And I think that's really helpful for people to hear because so many of us have a loved one that is struggling with their mental health. And I feel like a lot of people don't really know what to say or they're scared to say the wrong thing. They don't know
Mhm.
how to help. So those tips and suggestions are really, really great. Thank you for sharing those. I think those are going to be really helpful for people.
Oh, good. Yeah, I think I've learned through this whole thing that self-awareness is crucial. It's on the person who struggles with anxiety, depression, whatever it is. It's really on you to know where you are, right? On the spectrum of, what you're dealing with and what it is that can help you. And sometimes these are things that you can do for yourself. Sometimes these are things you can do for yourself with support for someone else. And sometimes these are things that someone else really needs to step in and do for you, or some combination of those things. But if you don't know, first of all, where you are on that spectrum and or what will help you in the moment, there's really nothing your loved ones can do, because everything that they'll do, in your opinion, will be wrong. And so I would say to really spend a lot of time and really do that hard work to become more self-aware of those things.
Oh, right. I fully agree. And you mentioned a little bit of this before, but I think that it's also really important to be aware of your triggers. So, can
Mhm.
you speak a little bit about that and share some of your triggers?
So my triggers for sure are a busy schedule. That is one of my biggest triggers. Dinner time can be kind of a high anxiety situation because we have, first of all, it's a late dinner. So we're all hungry and kind of in that hangry state. But I'm still kind of decompressing from my day. My husband's decompressing from his day. My kids are all coming into the situation trying to, get their needs met and get attention from all of us. And all at the same time, I'm trying to cook a meal that everyone's probably complaining about anyway, because it's hard to satisfy five different people. So in those situations, if I have not taken care of myself during the day to really keep my battery full, then that is a surefire time for me to be like, I cannot do this. I need to get out of this situation, which sounds horrible, right? Because this is my family and I love them. But what I want people to take away from that is that if I do the things that I know I need to do, that I know I should do for myself throughout the day, we have those situations much less frequently. I hope that helps. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, that makes so much sense. That helps a lot. So I do want to talk about because so many people struggle with their mental health and I do at times as well, but I don't have any kids. So I
Mm,
can't even imagine how difficult it is to struggle with your mental health and try to take care of yourself and put in that effort for self-care and take care of your mental health when you have 3 children that you're responsible for. Can you talk about your mental health, trying to take care of yourself and heal yourself while having children?
yeah. So it used to be that I just took everything on. I never said no to anybody. And my plate was always just so incredibly full because I wanted to please everyone. And that is a sure way to, burn out and all kinds of things. And so I have had to learn that I need to protect my time, first of all, but really protect my sanity and my mental health. And what that looks like is saying no to things or relying on other people to fulfill those roles. So my kids are active, they're in sports. I am not solely responsible for taking them here, there, and everywhere. I have a very involved partner. He does a lot of the running around. We've learned to divide and conquer really well, which is really helpful. But you're right. As a mom, it is incredibly hard to recognize a need and then fulfill that need for yourself when you have all of these kids and a spouse or whatever running around, because everyone always needs your help, right? And so some moms get up early in the morning and do their morning routine and that's enough for them. I am not one to get up super early, so that doesn't work for me. I want to make sure that I mention that because I would always hear things like, oh, you just need to journal, you need to get up an hour early and work out and do this and that. Well, that's just unrealistic for me. And all that means is that I need to find something that does work for me. It's not that this person is saying that this thing works for them. And so if I can't make that work, then I'm a failure and I suck at life and I just have to live this way. That's not the reality. The reality is there are things that you can identify for you that are unique to you and your experience. And you can work them into your routine and your schedules with your family with their support. And so my kids are older, they're 11, 13, and 17. And so I can share with them very openly about, my mental health and what I'm struggling with. And I can apologize when my mental health kind of gets in the way of something we're doing today or our relationship or whatever. And I can really take them on this journey with me. I mentioned to someone not that long ago that when I first received this diagnosis and I was kind of like in the thick of things, I went into this like, woe is me. Why did this have to happen to me? My poor kids, I'm failing them, all of these things. And now that I've come to the other side, I've really noticed that this was a gift. to me because now I can supply my children with the self-care tools and the coping tools and strategies that they need to have a mentally healthy life. And so while they may inherit my anxiety and depression, hopefully they never get to a point that they're having several panic attacks a day before they reach out for help because I've normalized that for them. I've given them strategies, and I've helped them through their own kind of struggles while I have access to them in my house.
Oh, I love that. I absolutely love that. And I really like that you said, what works for you and what doesn't. I'm glad you mentioned that because I'm very similar. I am not a morning person. I cannot get up early. I wake up at the last possible moment I have to get my butt to work on time. So I'm
Yes.
really glad that you mentioned that because what works for some people will not work for others. And that's something that we really commonly hear is wake up early, wake up an hour early to do this and to do yoga and to meditate and to journal. And I physically cannot do it.
Yeah, so I found like really little ways to treat myself. I have an oil diffuser in my bedroom, so I put like lavender essential oils in there so that when I come in for bed, it smells like a spa. Like little things like that that remind me that I am important and my needs are important, and I deserve to be treated like I matter. And so when I treat myself like I matter, it like reinforces that message, right? So instead of feeling like I don't matter or I have to be at the bottom of my list or whatever, I do these like very tiny things throughout the day that remind myself, no, you do matter. You are special. Someone does love you. You love you. And that's important.
Oh yeah, I really love that. And I want to get into more and deep dive into how you take care of yourself and tips and strategies. But first, can we go back to, I want to go back to a little bit. You mentioned the process of getting on medication and getting off of it and
Mhm.
not finding the right medication and trying to find a therapist. I know that whole process is very overwhelming and discouraging for a lot of people. So, can you talk about your process a little bit and if that was discouraging for you or if you were hopeful during that process?
Yeah. So the first time I went to my primary care provider, I just basically called them crying, saying that I needed an appointment to talk about getting on anxiety medicine. They got me in pretty much right away. My doctor looks at me and says, what's going on? Do you want to talk about it? And I just start crying again. So she gets, the paper test, on a scale of 1 to 10, how many days in a row do you feel this way or that way? And that's kind of how I got my diagnosis. But then she brings in the behavior specialist. And, the doctor says, yes, Megan, I will give you medicine, but really you have to talk to this behavior specialist. And I encourage you to go into therapy so that you can work on, other strategies beyond the medicine. And at the time, I was grateful to the behavior therapist. She really gave me some good strategies. And I kind of just let myself believe that I did not have time for therapy and just took my medicine and called it a day. Looking back on it, that might be why I think the medicine didn't work because, and maybe it truly didn't work. But now what I know and what I've done differently now is, you cannot just take a prescribed medicine and think, you're cured now. Like you still have to take care of yourself and, utilize your coping strategies when you're having a hard time and setting up solid routines for yourself that you can use all the time, but especially when you're having a hard time. So now I'm learning to take care of like my whole self. When I went off of that medicine, again, I worked with my doctor. I had talked to my husband about it. Like it was a team effort. It wasn't just something that I just decided not to take one day. I started therapy in 2020. That was where I started because I was hell bent on not going back on medicine, actually. I met with my therapist every single week. And every single week, she would very gently ask, have you considered or reconsidered, maybe it's time to consider medicine. And every single week, I would say, no, Sasha, I need you to give me some tools. I need to just, I feel better every time I talk to you. This is going to be fine. I don't, and what I would say, And I hope that this doesn't trigger anybody, but what I would say to her is, Sasha, I do not have time for my brain to be an experiment right now. There's so much going wrong with my brain that I cannot afford the possibility that I might make it worse. So I'm not interested in medicine. And I worked with her for 3 months before she finally convinced me to go to a primary care doctor that she worked very closely with. And I gave them permission to kind of share my records. So they were allowed to discuss my case together. And I went to see her doctor, and it was just a very different experience. The conversation was very different about, now I had a history of medicine, right? So she was able to ask me, what were you on before? Why didn't you like it? Why do you feel like it didn't work? Now I have the knowledge that other members of my family suffer with similar struggles and they take medicine. I know the names of those medicines. I can give them to my doctor. She takes all of that information and she says, okay, this is what I want you to try. And we know the stuff doesn't work overnight, right? So it's kind of a frustrating process because now you're taking medicine and it hasn't kicked in yet. So you're kind of like waiting, like, when am I going to feel better? But she was very, very clear that, this was a 30-day trial essentially, and that I was to call her in 30 days and let her know how I was feeling. And at that point, we could assess, if we needed to switch medicines completely, change the dosage, or leave things as they are. I would also say too that something my therapist reminded me when I was finally, starting to accept the idea of taking medicine again. She reminded me that, some people take medicine for their mental health forever. Some people take medicine for their mental health to get them through a tough season, whatever they're struggling with in the moment. Sometimes it's somewhere in between. So it's not a life sentence always. And even if it is something that you have to take forever, if it's working and it's making you feel good and you have improved relationships and you have the energy to, meet your basic needs so that you can start building on top of those things to really fill your cup, why wouldn't you consider that? And I just think that I spent a long time feeling like, well, if I could just journal, if I could just be grateful, if I could just get outside more, like if I could just do all of these things, then I wouldn't struggle with my mental health. But the reality was I wasn't getting up and getting in the shower. Do you really think I was going to get up and go outside and go for a walk?
Right.
The answer to that is no.
Right. Well, thank you for sharing that because, some people really are so resistant to taking medications, but
Mhm.
some people really do just need them. Like you said, we have all the tools, we have all the coping strategies, but sometimes they just don't work and we need a little bit more. And for some people, medication works much, much better. It's much more effective when you're doing those coping strategies and you're in therapy at the same time, which you
Mhm.
mentioned. So, yeah, that's great. And are you currently still on the anxiety meds now?
I am. So actually, I think what I take is just a depression medicine. I have a take as needed anxiety medicine. I don't usually take that, which is great. Because what I've found is that my depression really fuels my anxiety. And so, as long as I can keep my depression under control, my anxiety does not interfere as much. And so, I do take depression medicine every single morning.
Okay, great. That's really, really great to hear. And I think will give a lot of my listeners a lot of hope. So thank you for sharing that. So, as for your coping strategies, your tips, your advice, taking care of yourself as a whole person and beyond the meds, can you deep dive into all of that?
Yeah. And a lot of people are going to hear some of these things and they're going to be thinking, like, I do not have time for these things. And I'm just going to say ahead of time, you have to make the time. Like, I understand that, life is hectic and chaotic, and sometimes you do just have to power through, but there's a limit to how often and for how long you can do that before it starts to really deteriorate your mental health. So, I would say start small and start thinking of very small things that you can begin to implement and then build on those things. I would say a mistake that I made in the beginning was that I thought that I had to, all of a sudden change everything about my life and develop all of these new habits and routines. And that's just not sustainable. And so I'll give my bedtime routine, for example. I used to more often than not have a glass of wine or two with dinner or after dinner or whatever before bedtime. And I realized that the alcohol was definitely not helping my mental health. And so I cut that out, but I replaced it with a sleepy time tea. And I gave myself a bedtime. So instead of drinking wine and hanging out and watching TV for God knows how long, I gave myself a bedtime, and my family now knows that mommy turns into a pumpkin at 10 p.m. and literally do not bother her unless the house is really on fire. And my husband takes over from there because he's a night owl. So that works for us. And so I started with just the sleepy time tea and a bedtime of 10 p.m. And then I added in the essential oils. And then I added in, a skincare routine. And now I have this nice little, and then I added in a journal, right? So now I have the like 5 or 6 things that I look forward to every single night. They're like a little treat. And it helps me unwind and it gets me in that mood for sleep. Since I have developed this routine, I can say with confidence that I really don't struggle with insomnia like I used to. And I think that it's just because, I have this routine and it does settle me and I found what works for me. And because I did things one by one and just added on over time, it wasn't something that I thought sounded good one day. And then 2 weeks later, I'm not doing it anymore. So that's one instance, an example of like something that I do. Another thing that I do is really making sure that I'm eating well. This can be a little bit tricky depending on, your history with food and all that kind of stuff. I used to be one that struggled with yo-yo dieting and those types of things. And so releasing all of food rules has really helped me while also prioritizing like getting in enough fruits and vegetables. I know that I feel better when I eat a certain way. And so I prioritize those types of meals over other ones that I don't feel so good after I eat. And I really do make sure that I get outside a lot. And whether that's to just sit outside on my lunch break and read a book or listen to a podcast or take my dog for a walk or whatever, spending time outside really does something for me. And whether it's in a little way, again, like by taking a walk or just sitting outside or going on like a camping trip for the weekend, I always feel really great after spending like a weekend or a week in the woods. And so again, you have to just experiment and find what works for you and recognize one of the things I journal at night is I have a habits and routine kind of list. And it's not to shame myself for, it's been 2 weeks since you've done this thing, shame on you. It's not that. It's so that I can start to see trends. So I know that if I've gone, 3 days without getting outside, tomorrow I really need to prioritize time outside. And that's really all that I use it for. And that helps me stay on track so that I don't go, days, weeks, months on end without doing these things that I know are good for me, because really you need to be disciplined about it. These things are not just going to be easy to implement and be easy to do all the time because they do require discipline. And so I track them and I hold myself accountable to them.
Oh, great. Megan, this was so great. These tips and advice you have are so, so helpful. Thank you so much for being here today. This was so helpful. I know my audience is going to get so much value from it. So, is there any last words of wisdom you want to share with anybody struggling with their mental health?
I would just say, especially if you are a parent or a caregiver, to please let go of the idea that you do not have time or that, seeking professional help. I mean, listening to podcasts and reading books and doing all of those things is great. And I still do those things. But getting the literal professional help that you need does not make you a weak person or, someone who's unable to fulfill their responsibilities as a caregiver. Getting the help that you need will only make you stronger and more reliant to those people who are relying on you.
Yes, 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 yes. I could not agree more. Megan, can you tell everyone where to find you?
Yes. So I host the No BS Mama podcast. So you can listen to that wherever you listen to this podcast. And you can find me most often on Instagram at megan.edinger.
Awesome. Megan, thank you so much for being here and sharing your story with me and my audience today.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
Megan, thank you so much for sharing your story. I think this awareness is so important, so I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your story. If you liked this episode, please share it, tag me on social media at The Wellness Project with Des, and please, please leave me a review. I would really appreciate it as it helps my podcast to grow. If you aren't a member already, make sure you check the link in the show notes and join my Facebook community. It's facebook.com/groups/according to Des. I am in that group every day with all different tips and techniques to improve your life. And it's a really great, encouraging, supportive, and safe community. So be sure to join me in there. Thank you so much for listening today. I will not have an episode posted for the next 2 weeks because I will be away. So I will see you on June 23rd with another amazing guest. I hope you have a great couple of weeks.